Hello. Today we're going to talk about writing in a second language. Now, while some second language learners may have restricted needs for writing skills in English, many others need to be able to write for a variety of different purposes. They need to be able to write different kinds of academic texts, as well as writing for professional purposes in their working environment. However, good writing skills in either one's first or second language are very difficult to acquire. Whereas the ability to understand and speak one's mother tongue emerges naturally, if you like, through exposure and experience, and generally does so before a child's formal education commences, writing and reading are both dependent upon school-based instruction. Written English also differs in many ways from spoken English, and fluency in spoken English is not an indicator of how well someone can write. Despite the instruction people receive in school, however, many native speakers of English never develop good writing skills. It's not surprising then that second language learners face many difficulties in mastering writing skills in English. In this talk, I'd like to examine the nature of writing in a second language and also to consider approaches to the teaching of writing. Current approaches to teaching second language writing are informed by a considerable tradition of theory, research, and practice, and they're rather different from earlier approaches. For example, the audiolingual method, which served as the basis for the teaching of writing as it did in other skills in the first half of the 20th century, focused on control of sentence patterns and grammar through oral practice and drills, and then these same patterns were used as the basis for writing. Writing ability was mainly seen to involve developing linguistic and lexical knowledge, as well as familiarity with the syntactic patterns and cohesive devices that allow for sentence combining and which form the building blocks of texts. This is, in fact, an approach that still characterizes second language writing instruction in some parts of the world today. But before the 1980s, writing skills were perceived as dependent on imitating model compositions provided by the teacher. Teachers also employed dictocomp, that is an activity where the teacher reads a passage several times and students try to reconstruct it from memory. They also made use of sentence combining activities in which students try to combine two or more sentences into a more complex single sentence as a way of developing a better grasp of sentence grammar. Controlled or guided writing exercises were also employed. These involved students manipulating model texts by making various kinds of changes to them. These kinds of activities were designed to minimize the chance of making errors, and they also freed teachers from having to create large numbers of compositions, the curse of the writing teacher, if you like. And these exercises are still often seen in some course books. In the 1980s, the paragraph pattern approach was developed with a focus on different functional or organizational patterns such as narration, description, comparison, contrast, and exposition. Using the pattern product approach, teachers often focused on the concepts of the thesis statement and the topic sentence, on paragraph unity, on organizational strategies, and development of paragraphs by patterns or modes. Process, comparison, contrast, cause-effect, classification, and so on. These were the types of writing that students engaged in. And exercises to teach the logic of English organizational patterns often included unscrambling paragraphs or identifying irrelevant sentences deliberately placed within a paragraph, or perhaps identifying suitable topic sentences for specific paragraphs, or writing topic sentences for paragraphs from which the topic sentences had been removed. Different organizational patterns were said to reflect different types of academic writing, and a set of core functional writing categories were identified as the focus for academic writing courses: classification, comparison contrast, cause and effect, definition, description, narrative, processes, and reports. With this approach, students were taught the organization patterns that characterize each type of writing, focusing particularly on the role of thesis statements, topic sentences, supporting sentences and transitions, and other features of effective paragraphs and compositions. Grammar was also taught in relation to different types of writing. Instruction made use of model compositions, illustrating each functional type. And then students practiced writing their own compositions, reflecting the organizational pattern of the model. Approaches such as these that focus on different types of written products are, in fact, referred to as product-based. However, in the 1990s, process writing introduced a new dimension into the teaching of writing, with an emphasis on the writer and the strategies used to produce a piece of writing. This was contrasted with earlier product-based approaches that focused on the end results of writing rather than on the processes writers make use of when they write. In the process approach, writing is viewed as a complex, recursive and creative process that's very similar in its general outlines for both first and second language writers. Learning to write requires the development of an efficient and effective composing process. The composing processes employed by writers were explored, as well as the different strategies employed by proficient and less proficient writers. Process writing, particularly in the United States, soon became a movement, with its proponents arguing that product-based approaches failed to teach learners how to write, addressing the ends but not the means. And so, drawing from the work of first language composition theory and practice, second language students were soon being taught such processes as planning, drafting, revising, and editing, and how to give peer feedback. However, some people argued that this approach was more suited to intermediate and advanced level writers than beginners, for whom models of good writing were often needed. Both product and process-focused approaches are still commonly used in course books, though often features of the two are used together. In more recent years, second language writing instruction has been influenced by what's called a discourse and genre approach. This approach looks at the ways in which language is used for particular purposes in particular contexts. So the discourse and genre approach looks at the social context for writing. Is it work? Is it school? Is it home? And the participants and communities that exist in each context, and the purposes for which people write in different situations. This approach is commonly used in teaching writing for academic and professional purposes, and can also be used together with features of a process approach. So, in constructing texts, the writer must employ certain features conventionally associated with the genre in which he or she is writing. This means that the information in it should be organized according to the appropriate paragraph format, and it should reflect the norms of the context in which it's used, the audience it's intended for, and the purpose the writer seeks to achieve. Good writers are not only aware of the nature of different text types, but are also aware of the situations where texts are used, the expectations of readers, and the cultural and rhetorical conventions that different texts may reflect. For example, students writing essays in a Western academic context are expected to use thesis statements and topic sentences, and are expected to express an individual stance in discursive writing, features that may not be found necessarily in the writing conventions of other cultures. When writers create a text, it also needs to conform to recognizable patterns of organization. For longer texts, we expect to see the text organized into paragraphs, and within paragraphs to find main ideas and supporting details, features that contribute to what we call the coherence of a text. However, skilled genre users also adapt and personalize the rules of the genres they encounter by creating texts that are appropriate to different disciplines and professional contexts. They do not always apply the rules strictly, but they can use them creatively within the boundaries of the new genre that they encounter. The conventions accounting for the organization of text types in English may differ from those used in a student's native language, and students sometimes transfer discourse features from their native language into their written text in English. For example, composition teachers in North America often emphasize that every essay should have a thesis statement that tells the reader the stance the writer will take on the topic, and that this will usually occur near the beginning of the introductory paragraph. However, writers in some cultures do not usually use thesis statements in this way. They leave the writer to infer the writer's stance, or they present the writer's point of view at the end of the text. Similarly, students in the West are taught that not only does the essay as a whole need a thesis statement, that paragraphs should also have topic sentences, and the topic sentence should occur near the beginning of a paragraph. However, students may come from a writing tradition where the topic sentence does not occur in this position. Students in writing classes may come from cultures where writing plays a very different role from its role in the US, Canada, or Great Britain. There may have been little emphasis on creative and personal writing in their school experience, and they may be unfamiliar with some of the conventions underlying the kinds of writing they're expected to do in their academic program. For example, students in college programs in Canada and the US are generally taught that good writing expresses a point of view that reflects the writer's individuality. They're taught to engage in presenting and defending a point of view, as well as contesting other people's opinions. But this may be an unfamiliar and even an uncomfortable stance for students from more authoritarian cultures, where conformity rather than individuality is valued. The goal of writing instruction is to provide opportunities for learners to develop awareness of the conventions of written English and the nature of written texts, as well as the knowledge and skills needed to produce texts that are appropriate for their purposes. Writing is a complex form of communication, and writing skills take a long time to develop. Throughout the process of learning to write, teachers have a crucial role to play in guiding students through the processes of planning and creating written texts, and in creating a supportive environment for learners, one in which novice writers can explore the nature of written texts and the knowledge and processes involved in creating them. As students evolve in their writing, the roles of teachers and learners and the patterns of interaction between them will change as both collaborate in the different stages of the writing process. Providing opportunities for novice writers to master the different dimensions of writing is a continuous challenge in the teaching of writing, and one that cannot easily be reduced to lists of rules and formula. Teaching writing not only involves providing guidance and support for learners as they address these different dimensions of writing, but also involves helping sustain learners' motivation to improve their mastery of writing skills and conventions. An understanding of the nature of the issues learners face in mastering writing, as well as the ability to choose appropriate writing tasks and activities, are essential to success in the teaching of second language writing.